Vi invito a scegliere già la lingua della traduzione, avete le 8 lingue disponibili in basso nell'icona interpretazione. Le speaker possono rimanere fuori delle sale di interpretazione, ma poi se hanno bisogno delle traduzioni per ascoltare gli altri interventi devono scegliere la sala di interpretazione che preferiscono. Questo webinar sarà registrato e pubblicato sui nostri canali YouTube e sarà anche in streaming. I forgot to tell you that this webinar will be streamed in 5 languages, so if you, for your information. Les invito a seleccionar el idioma abajo en el icono interpretación. Están disponibles los 8 idiomas de este webinar. Todo el webinar será grabado y también enviado en streaming al mismo momento. Pour les personnes qui parlent français, en bas, vous avez le symbole interprétation et vous pouvez choisir la langue. Vous avez les 8 langues disponibles pour cet webinaire. Tous les webinaires seront enregistrés. Et les micros et le vidéo des participants seront fermés. Also, the chat is not available publicly. You can just write to the host. We will open the chat when we have the QA session. Anche la chat è chiusa per il momento, sarà disponibile soltanto nella sessione di domande. La chat está cerrada por el momento y pueden escribir solamente al anfitrión y después la vamos a abrir para la sección del diálogo.
Welcome to this webinar, which is part of the Sisters Empowering Women series. And this is kind of offering you a place at the table in the spirit of Fratelli Tutti. My name is Sister Pat Murray, and I'm the Executive Secretary of the International Union of Superiors General. The title of today's meal, in a sense, is Educating for Human Flourishing. And the background to this gathering is the Global Compact on Education. And we're also remembering the fact that the World Catholic Education Day was on the May 13th. And just to remember just the influence of Catholic schools and universities worldwide. We know that there are presently 61 million students globally enrolled at preschool, primary and secondary schools throughout the world. And a further 6.5 million students are enrolled in Catholic higher educational institutes. So today we are looking at a variety of topics within this field of education. We're looking at education and Amoris Laetitia, which is a very important document, and also looking at the education that takes place in a crisis context. And we know during this time of COVID, we have faced a crisis. and that the educational systems worldwide have felt the effects of the pandemic and have tried to make a rapid response through online educational platforms. And we know that health and other areas are responding to this pandemic. But also, Pope Francis has said, we also need a new cultural model, that the pandemic has helped us to realize that what is really needed today is a new way of understanding reality and of relating to one another. So education today more than ever has to be transformative, and it needs cooperation and solidarity and interdependence and tackling any indifference to what's happening in the world. There's a lovely quote from Pope Francis, which says, "We know that the journey of life calls for hope grounded in solidarity. And in this new paradigm, we need to be able to respond to the problems and challenges of the contemporary world. We need to find ways of understanding and finding solutions to the needs of every generation. And in this way," he says, "we will contribute to the flourishing of humanity now and into the future." So today's topic of educating for human flourishing is well chosen. So as we proceed this afternoon, let us realize that we're shaping the future of our planet together and calling on the talents of everyone, and particularly focusing within the educational process at how we can develop universal solidarity and be a more welcoming society. So I'm going to invite, first of all, Sister Grazia Loparco, who's a Salesian sister, to reflect with us on education in terms of the empowerment of young people and of teenagers and young adults. Sister Grazia is a member of the Salesian community. She has a doctorate, a master's and a doctorate in church history from the Pontifical Gregorian University. She teaches church history in the Pontifical Faculty of Science and of Education in the Auxilium University here in Rome. She's the vice president there. She has lived here in Rome in an international community since 1992, and she has published widely during this time, particularly over the last 2 decades, in particularly on congregations with a ministry and a mission in education. She's a consultor for the Congregation for the Causes of Saints, and she also coordinates the Centro Studio Figlio de Maria Auxiliatrice. You're most welcome, Sister Grazia, to address us now. Thank you.
Grazia, il microfono.
Ok, grazie a tutti voi.
Thank you very much to all of you. I must say that I'm truly grateful of having been invited to such a rich meal where my very few words represent simply the hors d'oeuvre. I'd like to now introduce this theme with a bit of an historical background, and which also helps us to be creative in order to prepare a future for all, as Sister Pat.
In Occidente si parlò dei diritti naturali.
That in the 19th
Per l'elite era chiaro che anche le donne
rights were discussed in the West. It's clear also to intellectual elites that women also needed to be educated and be involved. But you know, from deeds, from words to deeds, there was like a sea of prejudices, and
aprì anche alle donne il campo della
Meanwhile, after the French Revolution, the force of events opened up the field of apostolate in the religious life to women. The attention of many sisters turned spontaneously to girls and young women who needed to be prepared for the responsibilities of adult life needed to be prepared for the responsibilities of adult life, capable of understanding, living, and transmitting the faith in the family. Therefore, the female education and instruction became a privileged field and contributing to the only truly successful revolution in the century. And I must say that this is the only one which has been considered successful. The heavy situation of female subordination and marginalization gradually changed thanks to growing number of women religious dedicated to promoting women as Christians to save their souls, but not only in praying, but by engaging in daily life to improve it. So we know perfectly well that in the Christian vision, that education is more than simple education and cultural formation. It is about developing the best and the potential of the entire person, mind and heart together to awaken and make aware of the conviction that the world we live in can change. And this has certainly made aware many young women that the world can change. So learning means learning to take the floor, to be able to put into words emotions, feelings, joys, sorrows, discomforts, ways of seeing reality. Education is the true awakening of their dignity. And which is the consequence? The consequence is empowering, being empowered, and taking on one's responsibility, not only towards oneself, towards the family, but also towards society and the church. And this, therefore, education has been considered a source of socialization, elevation, broadening of interests of many women
molto ristretti.
Would have a very limited prospects in their lives. Let's think about social networks today. Basically, social networks represent a borderless world, and these social networks not only network, but also allow for a greater development. And in fact, many women, I'm thinking about the 19th century, of course, were able to open up and break through in new areas, but many poor remained behind. And the religious women were particularly attracted by those left behind. I would say that for the last 2 centuries, the religious women from the very beginning of their congregations, they have been working in these fields. But I would say that at least for about 150, 170 years, so when they were allowed to, women religious were not afraid of undertaking long and dangerous journeys with different languages, different cultures, even in situations of poverty of sacramental life, and getting or reaching where there were girls without any kind of opportunity. So basically, the religious women have, and the small schools of the religious arrived where the state and the municipalities arrive late. And when they arrive, they often neglect the girls and young women, as relatives do when they have to choose between sons and daughters to send to school. So the possibility of the apostolate open to women religious in active life has opened up unsuspected ways for the church to announce with gestures and words the maternal face of the church, its care for the person. Missions are an emblematic case. From the middle of the 19th century onwards, vocation of education led many women religious to leave their homeland and face hardships and risks to reach places as pioneers, because in fact, women up to that, 19th century were very happy to stay in their familiar environment if they were not forced to emigrate, while missionaries not only crossed the oceans during months in extraordinary, exceptional conditions compared to their regular lives out of economic necessity, or for a spirit of adventure, but instead to bring a proclamation of liberation and salvation that has given joy to them first, but also conveying this message of joy to others, because the gift must be communicated, whatever it costs. Now, of course, this is when the mission becomes like a laboratory where faith and the choice and vocation are tested, just like Mary Magdalene did at the grave of Jesus Christ. So religious are truly outgoing women attracted by the poor peripheries of industrial cities, social peripheries, isolated places that are certainly not a tourist attraction. Many missionaries, the journey to the theological place of encounter, as Adriana Valerio says in her presentation of the Superior General of the Daughters of Mary Help of Christians, Caterina Daguerro, who between 1895 1897 traveled through many countries in South America, thousands of kilometers, using all possible means to find and support the sisters and girls. So after having sent many letters, she basically went locally to see them. So this religious, she was from Piedmont. She was not certainly accustomed to seas, to mosquitoes, to malaria, but nothing stopped her, just like Leopoldina Lode had done in Sudan. Francesca Cabrini, or the sisters in India, and Francesca Cabrina, who had learned to keep her eyes not downcast, as they were taught women to do, but keeping her eyes wide open on reality. So did many and many other religious in the East, in the West, in Asia, in Africa, in America. Those who saw and allowed themselves to be touched by the needs of the poorest of the poor went and forever responded without looking back. This was the Catholic love, so the source of courage, which gave them also the courage to travel borderless. And that was actually the courage to open up, to be challenged by those who actually act in a different way. And it was truly the contact with painful realities which has helped many missionaries to ask themselves new questions, to look at the surrounding reality with other eyes, and to review their own mental frameworks and scales of values, traveling and leaving their homeland and their own geographical and mental boundaries, meant for many religious women to change their mindset with respect to the hegemonic vision of their own civilization and of the Catholic Church, which was also their mentality. The Salesian Superior, which I mentioned, did not hesitate in recognizing the cruelty of the Europeans towards the customs of some tribes was worse. And she was quoting open brackets, "That is savage cruelty, but this is demonic cruelty," close brackets. And this is what she said with horror, noting the forest fires in Brazil that had decimated the indigenous population. So back in the 19th century, it was the attention to concrete people that encourages to overcome conditioning. And so basically women become empowered, and this empowerment opens up also and is extended to other people. We can also add that before the Second Vatican Council, the impossibility for women to study theology, which has certainly been a constraint, made them probably more flexible, less anchored to one-sided doctrinal schemes. Faith and charism become a driver for personal overcoming and crossing borders so basically crossing these borders to assert a universal fraternity to be discovered, announced, built up, and nurtured. So women arrived at the extremes, at the ends of the world, to proclaim the salvation for all without distinction, to lend a hand to girls, to other women, not only to teach them how to comb, to sew clothes, to read catechism, to write, to farm, to earn, to take care of their children or their families, but also to find reasons to smile, to share, and to dream a change in their environment. And I would say this has also been another element of progress. Locally, this is true, but I think it would deserve even a research, an historical research, also at global level, because I think it would be very interesting to understand which has been the contribution of female congregations in the development of a number of countries. I believe that religious women have inaugurated in different times and in many places what we have defined and denominated the Educational Pact, which they have considered a covenant in the preparation for adult life, where one takes on one's responsibility, complicity with families when they exist, based on trust and encouragement between losers. We can use the word losers in the eyes of the powerful. It is an education that cannot be improvised. And in the fidelity to daily life, where one step at the time is taken, a care for the human being is achieved through a compassionate look at reality. So in this way, women religious have been and still are active agents of social and ecclesial change, of an empowerment from below in solidarity, many times with the effectiveness of choices which to evolve situations that humiliate human dignity. It is a word that often becomes a gesture, an effective revelation of a grammar of love that even non-believers know how to recognize. I'd like to conclude these very few words by telling you where graciousness, perfumes, beauty, faith flourishes in a love that is consistent and rich in imagination, which is the imagination of the spirit, which is creative love, and which is always tailored to the person loved. I would like to thank you, and I wish you, all of you, a fruitful persecution of this conversation today.
Thank you very much, Sister Grazia. That was surely a tour de force as you really spanned history and reminded us. I'm sure as we listened, we could think of our own particular founders and foundresses who had a vision, and also the many hundreds of thousands of sisters who saw the needs, who took the step of traveling to far distant places, to the ends of the earth, who saw education as a means of empowerment, who looked at, you said, looked at reality with eyes wide open, particularly towards the needs of the poor, who asked new questions, and then who saw with new eyes and gained new perspectives. I was particularly challenged by when you said that, in fact, their journeys allowed them to be, instead of being constrained by theological frameworks, that they were actually more flexible and less trapped by doctrine. They could see and name the cruelties. They could pay attention to the social situations. So I think you've given us many questions that we have to bring into our own day, because you said, how do we bring their gracious presence and their prophetic presence into the world of education today? How is it truly a place of encounter, and particularly encounter with those on the margins of life, to bring fullness of life to each person and to all? So again, our gratitude to you for this wonderful introduction to today's webinar. It's now my pleasure to introduce Her Excellency Loparco, who's the Australian ambassador to the Holy See. Her Excellency is a career diplomat who joined Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in 2009. She has held a number of positions in Canberra, including most recently, she was the Director, Ministerial and Executive Liaison Section of the Executive Branch. She was seconded as an advisor to the International Division of the Department of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet in 2016. And she has worked with the department's budget branch and Africa branch. Overseas, Ambassador Loparco has served in New Caledonia and for a short mission in West Africa and a second secretary in New Delhi, India. She holds a Master's of International Relations and Diplomacy from the University of Leiden in the Netherlands and a Bachelor of Arts in Politics, Philosophy and Economics from the University of York in the United Kingdom. She speaks Italian and French. She presented her credentials to His Holiness Pope Francis on the 27th of August 2020. And finally, not finally, maybe more importantly, she's married and she has 2 children. You are most welcome, and we welcome you to our gathering today.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Sister Pat, and it's my pleasure and honor to be here and participating today in this webinar as the moderator for this next session. I'll shortly introduce the 2 speakers that we have for this session, and we have approximately an hour of time, with a little bit of time at the end for a few questions and answers. So please, once we open the floor for questions, please submit your questions in the chat, and I will pose a few of them to our speakers. Just before I introduce our 2 speakers, I just wanted to say a few words. I'm very pleased again to be here and participating in this seminar in particular, because education is so important both to me but also to the Australian government. As we all know, education is a right, not a privilege, and it's critical for our future. As Pope Francis has said, a good education makes an enormous difference in the lives of young people, allowing them to contribute their full potential. And it's exactly what we need to secure and ensure our future. I'm also very pleased to be here today because we are marking the 200th anniversary of Catholic education in Australia. The first Catholic school was established in Parramatta, just near Sydney, or in Sydney, near where I grew up, in 1821. Nowadays, and since then, Catholic education has expanded and now covers from preschool all the way up to university. And it's a major part of our educational ecosystem in Australia. 1 in 5 children, in fact, in Australia are educated in a Catholic school. Religious sisters have, of course, played a critical role over the years in this development of Catholic education, from our very own saint, Mary MacKillop, who was a real pioneer and set up schools for the most marginalised in Australia and very remote communities, including also our Indigenous population, to the large number of religious orders who still run many of the schools today. The sisters have also played a key role in addressing some of the darker aspects of the history of Catholic education in Australia, in particular instances of child abuse that came to light as part of our Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. And they have worked very hard to put in place measures to ensure prevention and support to our survivors. But what is clear, and we've already heard from Sister Grazia and also Sister Pat, that our youth, particularly in this increasingly turbulent world we live in, with consequences of this terrible pandemic that we are yet to see, our youth need all the support they can get. And how can we provide that support? How can we ensure that they flourish? So now I'd like to hand over to our speakers. Our first speaker is Sister Alcelia Hernandez Elizondo, who's an official of the congregation that has been living in Italy for 17 years. She's a Franciscan sister, and she studied philosophy at the Pontifical Lateran University, as well as the Università degli Studi di Roma II Tor Vergata. So over to you, Sister Alcelia.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Soy muy contenta de representar hoy.
I'm truly very happy to be here with you today and to present the speak on behalf of the Congregation for Catholic Education. And I would like to greet all the participants and organizers of this event. In particular, I send cordial greetings from the prefect, Cardinal Giuseppe Versaldi, and from the secretary, His Excellency Angelo Zani. It is 5 years since the post-synodal apostolic exhortation, Amoris Laetitia, on beauty and joy of conjugal and family life was promulgated. On the occasion of this anniversary, we are invited to reread the document and reflect on the theme, culminating in the celebration of the 10th World Day of Families, which, God willing, will take place here in Rome on 26th of June, 2022. As you know, the Congregation for Catholic Education reports directly to the Holy Father and is in charge of all matters concerning Catholic education. The congregation or dicastery has the task of developing, deepening, and promoting the fundamental principles of Catholic education as proposed by the magisterium of the Church, both in the context of the people of God and in the context of civil society. It is for this reason that the congregation feels called to live the apostolic exhortation as a journey of family encounter with the Church, immersing itself as an active member of families in the daily struggles of Catholic schools and universities. In this sense, the congregation feels committed to ensuring that parents are able to fulfill their obligations to provide a good education for their children, and that civil society also recognizes and protects this right.
Recording in progress.
En particular, la congregación establece directrices para las escuelas y las universidades católicas, muchas de las cuales son creadas.
Congregation sets guidelines for Catholic schools and universities, many of which are established and run by religious institutes, and at the same time assists diocesan bishops in their task of supervising the quality of the service offered, as well as in the training of formators in religious education as such and in the pastoral care of students, in the deepening of the various disciplines, taking into account Christian inspiration and the promotion of various forms of universal care. For this reason, our dicastery exercises a high degree of guidance over them. Catholic faith is safeguarded. For these reasons, the Congregation for Catholic Education is here today, accompanying you in this reflection on Amoris Laetitia, which has marked a path that seeks to promote a new pastoral approach to the reality of the family and of the church. In fact, the main intention of the document is to communicate in a profoundly changed time and culture that today requires a new look of the church and the family, to be custodians of the beauty of the family and to take care with compassion of its fragilities and its wounds. These two aspects are at the heart of all pastoral care. The frankness of the proclamation of the gospel and the tenderness of accompaniment. Let us turn to chapter 7 of Amoris Laetitia to respond to the title of the paper. Aspect number 1, the family is the initial place for building the new educational pact. Family life as a whole is an educational context. The family is the first school of human values, where one learns the proper use of freedom and the ability to discern critically the messages coming from outside and from the various means of communication. In times of pandemic, many challenges have been experienced. For example, the use of digital technology has allowed contact with people forced to be confined and isolated. It has allowed remote learning. It has allowed for smart working, also allowing a decongestion of urban areas. However, with the pandemic, the differences in the world have worsened even more, and family-school relations have been so difficult that Pope Francis has even spoken of an educational catastrophe. The school has a more formal and rational task in education than the family. However, both must work together if they are to achieve the good goals for the target group. In order to promote such a relationship, we can use and avail ourselves of the guidelines set out in the Global Compact on Education as a support in dealing with current problems, starting from the objectives indicated by the Holy Father and considering that they are common to all educational bodies. It is important to ask ourselves what more concrete aspects should be established in the educational pact for an effective collaboration between schools and families. In this sense, the 7th chapter of the Apostolic Exhortation Amoris Laetitia indicates a concrete to heal 3 fractures. First fracture. The first fracture, we will call it a vertical one. That is the one where there is a separation or a gap between reality and transcendence. The Bible speaks of a God who created us out of love and who has made us in such a way that our life does not end with death. Unfortunately, sometimes we live without God. And this shows that some people live as if they were dead. The family and the school are called upon not to give up, to being a place of support, accompaniment, and guidance for those who feel lost. It is necessary to identify that many of the problems arise for wanting to be independent of God. Our response can be education to transcendence. Educating, in fact, implies the task of promoting a responsible freedom, which knows how to choose with common sense and intelligence. That freedom is an immense gift from God. Prudence, good judgment, and good sense do not depend on merely quantitative factors of growth, but on a whole chain of elements that are synthesized in the interior of the person, to be more precise, in the center of his or her freedom. It is inevitable that each child surprises us with the projects that spring from this freedom, that breaks out patterns, and it is good that this happens. Education entails the task of promoting responsible, freedom. People who make choices at crossroads with sense and intelligence, people who understand that life and that of their life and is in their hands, and freedom is an immense gift. Catholic educational institutions, religious families, and all educators are called to remind that the new generations that freedom is concrete, real, and also limited and conditioned. It is not a pure capacity to choose the good with total spontaneity, since a proper distinction is not always made between a voluntary act and a free act. For example, someone may want something bad with great force of will because of an irresistible passion or bad upbringing. In that case, his decision is very voluntary. It does not contradict the inclination of his will, but it is not free because it has become almost impossible for him or for her not to opt for evil. Second fracture, education must seek to heal the second fracture, which has taken the horizontal relationship between generations and made people rigidly individualistic, distancing them from the role of the community in personal growth. To understand and to embark on this path, it is necessary, first of all, to feel called to choose an active framework of evaluation that guides towards an education to fraternity, not only to seek a common good, but because only in the communion of intentions we will be able to achieve a better world. The search for values is one of the challenges facing human beings at all times, and which now reveals an international planetary dimension, not only because, on the one hand, the development of communication techniques favors an increasing interaction between people, societies, and culture, but above all, because each person can abstract from his own or her own reality the fact that the challenges of today's fragmented world call upon everyone and every culture. A local event can have an almost immediate planetary consequence. What happens to you here can also, can also happen to me here. Thus developing an awareness of global solidarity, which must find its ultimate foundation in the unity of the human race. So a unity that must be translated into planetary responsibility. Only if we embark on the search for common values, we will achieve common goals and the objective of moving in the same direction. In fact, we are convinced that charity is not a fantasy or fruit of imagination, because throughout history, those who have been known how to live it have shown that it knows no limits, but instead it opens up new paths. Therefore, avoiding excessive profits for the benefit of a few is not an injustice. Rather, even grammatically, the adjective excessive is among the meanings of what is wrong and therefore contrary to justice. It is not a question of choosing saving as an end in itself, but choosing rather the values of respect and the good of the other. Consecrated people have received through their vocation the gift of living in a large family and experiencing the gift of communion. For this reason, they are particularly called through the educational entities they govern they lead, they integrate values for the construction of the common good, always appealing to respect for the sacredness of life, to respect for the dignity and freedom of others, and to the loving commitment for all. We choose to live communion because we are aware that what is good for me is good for all. We choose, therefore, to follow the direction of the meaning intrinsic in communion. Communion also highlights the sense of our direction. We do not walk together as sheep, but we walk in communion of intentions. Because the direction that we have decoded fulfills us as men and women, orders society to the common good, and guarantees the attainment of the anthropological and eschatological sense, the happiness of being one. Third fracture. On the other hand, the third fracture is with our common home, the Earth, our planet, the Earth. With the third fracture, we are called to take care, jointly take care for our common home. Therefore, through education for ecology, man is reconciled with nature and gives the environment its value while receiving its benefits. Achieving an integral ecology requires a profound interior and educational conversation from a personal as well as a communal level. In examining the great challenges facing us today, including climate change, the need for sustainable development, and the contribution that religion can make to the environmental crisis, it is essential to break with the logic of exploitation and selfishness and to promote the practice of a sober, simple, and humble way of life, as we can read in Laudato Si and as stated in Laudato Si. Education can help to cultivate in the hearts of all an awareness of shared responsibility and the renewed commitment to be stewards and leaders of the gift of his creation. This is a process that helps us to become aware of our contribution to the ecological crisis and moves us to act in ways that cultivate communion with God, with creation, and with others. May this new vision bring about a relational view of humanity and care for our world from different points of view: ethical, scientific, social, and theological. Remembering that the world carries within itself a charism of unity. May this perspective guide our work in recognizing that everything is connected and that a concern for the environment must be coupled with a sincere love for human beings and a constant engagement with the problems of society. Dear brothers and sisters, the Congregation for Catholic Education wishes all good for your work. May this help the Church to assimilate and develop the contents and style of Amoris Laetitia. May you contribute to the formation of animators of family groups in parishes, associations, and movements. May you support the journey of so many families, helping them to live the joy of the gospel and to be active cells in the community. Solidarity and commitment of all is needed. The collaboration of all is needed in order to take up the message of Amoris Laetitia and translate it into concrete life for the good and the future of the human life. Before concluding, I feel my duty to remind you that the Holy See, through its dicasteries, and in this particular case, the dicastery for Catholic education, accompanies you and supports you in the arduous work in favor of education. Good collaboration between educational entities and the organisms and the entities of the Holy See undoubtedly helps to carry out the mission that Christ has entrusted to this church, his church, through the Holy Spirit, the salvation of souls. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sister Alcelia, for those words and those reflections. I found it particularly useful to hear a little bit of the work that the Congregation for Catholic Education is doing and the role it plays, and then also your reflections on the importance of the family as the initial building point for education, the first school of human values, as you described it, and also learning how to discern, a very, very important tool. And also during these times of the pandemic, as you were saying, family-school relations have become even more problematic and have to be an area of focus. Thank you also for taking us through this quite philosophical reflection on the three fractures that we're seeing at the moment. The vertical one, as you described, which is sort of the relationship of the individual. The second fracture, the more community one, I guess the fracture across generations. And then this final fracture, our relationship with our common home and planet Earth. And I think your description of the important role that education can play in addressing these three fractures was quite sobering, actually, and really sent a really strong message again about the importance of engaging on these issues. I'd like to turn now to our second speaker, Sister Miriam Altenhofen, who is originally from Germany. She's a member of the Missionary Sisters Servants of the Holy Spirit, and she's a psychologist. She's worked or been present in the Netherlands, in Botswana, and of course here in Italy. She has studied pastoral theology as well as psychology, of course, at the Gregorian University in Rome. And since 2014, she has been on the General Council of her congregation, with her areas of expertise in particular being formation, leadership, facilitation of discernment processes, and interculturality. Over to you, Sister Miriam.
Thank you very much, Chiara. And thank you also to Sister Pat for the invitation. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to every one of you. And it's a pleasure to be with you. So the topic of this series is educating for human flourishing. And as we know, we first have to start with ourselves. So educating ourselves in order to understand a little better the situation and also then work with groups and persons whom we meet. I will share now my screen. So flourishing in times of crisis. This is quite a challenge because we are in times of crisis. And crisis is always when we are somehow put out of our normal life. And when we are, and COVID-19 surely has thrown us out of the normal life. And since last year, we know what is a disruption of the normal. Initially, it was just a flu far away somewhere in China. Then it came closer and closer, and accompanied by lockdowns and strong regulations. Even today, many parts of our world, they are in a very bad shape, especially at the moment, India, Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay. Nobody really knows when it will be better. Will we ever return to the former normal? The vaccine gives us hope, but in many places, it still needs to be distributed. It has not arrived yet. A poll in the US by the American Psychological Association presented in the report Stress in America called the experience of living through the pandemic a collective trauma. And the question remains, when will this end? Will it ever end? We do not know. The virus, with all its consequences, causes an enormous amount of stress and anxiety. Psychologists and therapists report a sharp rise in stress, anxiety, and depression-related symptoms in their clients. COVID-19 can bring out the worst in people, and it shows us also where our world today is especially in need. It can also bring out the best in people. In this situation of crisis, there emerged a great amount of practiced solidarity, like helping in the neighborhood, volunteers bringing food and other essentials to elderly and sick persons. As in every situation, what matters is how we respond to the challenge or disruption. Stress is a subjective feeling of emotional or physical tension. It might be caused by an event or thought. Even a thought can create stress that makes you feel frustrated, angry, or nervous. This is accompanied by a body reaction. Stress can be positive, eustress, such as when it helps you avoid danger or meet a deadline. What for one person is stress can be for another one just excitement. Therefore, it is very subjective and difficult to measure. Fear is one of the 7 universal emotions experienced by everyone around the world. Fear arises with the threat of harm, either physical, emotional, or psychological, real or imagined. While traditionally considered a negative emotion, fear actually serves an important role in keeping us safe as it mobilizes us to cope with potential danger. The situation, and especially now also with COVID, is perceived as a real, sometimes a life-threatening danger. We shut down and focus only on our survival needs: food, drink, physical security, being safe behind doors and fences or walls. COVID-19 and the lockdowns brings to the surface tensions which were already there before, like relational problems or violence, abuse in families and other groups, injustice on a small or local and on the global scale. This causes a lot of stress and anxiety. Resilience and hope for the future. What can help us to go through this difficult time? How can we, as women religious, as leaders of groups, as communities, instill hope and help that we and the people with whom we are living and working, to whom we are ministering, can flourish in this difficult situation? One answer is to activate resilience. What is that? Resilience is the capacity to recover, respond, and bounce back from challenging times. That is one definition. But the goal is not only to bounce back into the old shape. That might not be possible. But to become creative and able to invest in a good future, in a better future for all. From a psychological point of view, the following are helpful behaviors which lay the groundwork for our own well-being and the well-being of our communities and groups in difficult times. We can encourage these behaviors. For example, a healthy lifestyle with enough sleep, physical exercise, healthy food. Practice a hobby, music, art, and so on. Be social. Take time for good relationships, friendships. Create community schedules that encourage exchange and meaningful conversations. Strengthen spiritual life through meaningful liturgies, rituals. Practice mindfulness and gratitude. Be positive, help others, go out of yourself. Celebrate life in all its forms. Humor is especially helpful. Hope and attuning into the good. Lucy Hone, a resilience researcher, says in her TED Talk, she talks about the 3 secrets of resilient people. And she describes how she was dealing with the death of her 12-year-old daughter and her friends in an accident. I mean, she has studied resilience and knew everything about it, but here she was really touched by it personally, and that changed it. And what helped her getting over the loss was choosing life, not death, deliberately. Choosing life, not death, deliberately, and hunting for the good. She calls it hunting for the good. She recommends closing every day with at least finding 3 good things that happened to you and being grateful for that. I think from our spiritual tradition, we know that very well. To close the day, looking at the day and also considering the positive. Another approach, anti-fragile. We find this approach in the book of Nassim Nicholas Taleb, called Anti-Fragile. According to Taleb, we live in a world which we cannot understand because it is so complex. We cannot even hope to understand it. Taleb proposes that we simply accept this reality, that we love it and try to thrive in it. This sounds first a little crazy, and immediately you ask yourself, but how? Are we not here to change things? How can we thrive in this complex reality with so many disturbances? COVID is only one of these. To make his point clear, he brings the example of wildfires. And I think in Australia, you are very familiar with these wildfires. In our modern world, we try to suppress small wildfires. We don't like them. The same is true for our disruptions in our little world. But this only leads to the accumulation of flammable materials on the forest floor, giving way to inevitable destructive infernos. We haven't grasped the function of the small wildfires, a disruption according to our point of view, in the whole of the system. We intervene and we make it worse. Sometimes through our interventions, it's not getting better. He says in his prologue, how to love the wind. Wind extinguishes a candle and energizes fire. Likewise, with randomness, uncertainty, chaos, disturbances, you want to use them, not to hide them. Use them. You want to be the fire and wish for the wind. In his book, Taleb distinguishes between fragile, robust, and anti-fragile. According to him, what is fragile breaks through the exposure to disturbance. What is robust just remains the same, and what is anti-fragile benefits from the exposure to disruption. According to Taleb, long-term stability in complex systems is best attained via frequent small-scale volatility in our world's disturbances. Think of the example of the small wildfires. So let's not shy away from disturbances. They are part of life, but let's accept and even love them. Because even there, we can find ways to thrive, find new ways, creative ways to make it better. But how? Creating a culture of encounter. I think Pope Francis gives us a good hint here. He often speaks of a culture of encounter. He challenges us to put all our energies in building up this kind of culture, especially in difficult times where we experience disruptions of what we consider as normal. quotation, the continued global health crisis has painfully highlighted the urgent need to promote a culture of encounter for the whole human family and for all men and women to be passionate about meeting others, seeking points of contact, building bridges, planning a project that includes everyone. We have the important task of bringing people together for meaningful conversations about the burning issues of today. And I think UISG is doing that, and focusing our energies on how to best respond from a faith viewpoint. This means building bridges, looking for ways of reconciliation, easing suffering as much as possible, and fostering a holistic human development. In Fratelli Tutti 215, Pope Francis uses the image of a polyhedron that represents a society where differences coexist, complementing, enriching, and reciprocally illuminating one another, even amid disagreements and reservations. The quotation, "Life, for all its confrontations, is the art of encounter. I have frequently called for the growth of a culture of encounter capable of transcending our differences and divisions. This means working to create a many-faceted polyhedron whose different sides form a variegated unity in which the whole is greater than the part." The image of a polyhedron can represent a society where differences coexist, complementing, enriching, and reciprocally illuminating one another. Each of us can learn something from others. No one is useless and no one is expendable. This also means finding ways to include those on the peripheries of life, for they have another way of looking at things. They see aspects of reality that are invisible to the centers of power where weighty decisions are made. Compassion, an outgrowth and at the same time the root of the culture of encounter, is compassion. Compassion is and caring are most needed in a leader and in our communities today. The meaning of compassion is to recognize the suffering of others and then to take action to help. Compassion embodies a tangible expression of love for those who are suffering. Frederick Buechner, an American writer and poet, once said, "Compassion is sometimes the fatal capacity for feeling what it is like to live inside somebody else's skin. It is the knowledge that there can never really be any peace and joy for me until there is peace and joy finally for you too." Compassion does not drain us. No, it makes us more resilient. It mobilizes our immune system it enlivens us, it enhances our neural integration. Compassion is good for others, it is good for us, and it is good for all of creation. It helps us to build up a more caring environment. So let's transform our world with loving compassion. Here, I want to show you an example of our sisters in Paraguay, who since more than 40 years fight at the side of the Ava Guarani, an indigenous group, for their rights and their land. We see what so often happens. They are driven from their land, and this happened on the 13th of May this year. Our sisters were present and have filmed it. In spite of many setbacks, our sisters with many others continue walking with them and supporting them in their struggle. And I just want to share with you a little video of the situation when they were driven away from their land. You saw in this little video taken by our sisters, the situation where the police is really surrounding them in their temple. Now, that was their temple, their holy place where they have liturgy. They are surrounded and slowly pushed away. And afterwards you see how their temple is destroyed and tractors are already there to cultivate the land. This is happening today, and not only in Paraguay. This was one example. Another example shows an initiative in Rourkela, an Indian diocese, where our sisters are involved, religious bringing hope to COVID patients. One patient says that she finds God's compassionate care in the service of the sisters. Loving and kind service instills hope, mental strength, and encouragement in our life. It makes us resilient and anti-fragile. Specific challenges for us today. Looking at our world today, we face several disruptions as religious women and as a world community. COVID-19 is not our biggest challenge. The biggest challenge is ecology and restoring balance to our planet. How can we intensify our commitment to working to save our common home? COVID-19 brings to the fore tensions which already exist, especially the divide between rich and poor. How can we live in solidarity? This is not a matter of health. It is a matter of global justice and peace. We are a global community. How can we act locally and at the same time globally? In the US, we observe the Black Lives Matter movement. What is our own situation with regard to equality? How much ethnocentricity and discrimination do we still have in our own ranks? As faith communities, we believe in a God who has good plans for us and wants us to prosper, even in very uncertain and difficult times. This can give us the passion to continue working for a world which is more beautiful, just and peaceful, and where everyone has a dignified space to live. Love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, humanity cannot survive. They are the path to thrive, even in difficult times. Love and compassion are anti-fragile. They are full of surprises, messy, risky, and impossible to imprison them into our plans. And with this, I end, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sister Miriam, for that incredibly interesting presentation. I think you started off by saying we have to educate ourselves before we educate others, and I think your presentation really touched and on a couple of aspects with regard to that. I think you situated your presentation very clearly in the context of the pandemic and the post-pandemic world and these times of crisis. And I think you rightly point out we don't know yet whether this will ever end, and what is most important is how we respond. And I think you've given us a few tips and pointers, including for ourselves, on how to deal with this increasingly complex situation that we're facing, whether that's through resilience or compassion, and most importantly through this culture of encounter, which you spoke about building bridges, about looking for ways to bring people together, to ease suffering. And I think, and the examples you gave as well from Paraguay and India really showed the work in particular of religious sisters in instilling hope and encouragement. So thank you very much for that presentation and giving us some real food for thought, particularly for those who are working in the education space and with younger people. We'll now take a little pause just for about a minute or so to allow our translators to have a little break, and also for people to submit questions into the chat. So please go ahead and send us your questions, and we'll have time for a couple now once we reconvene after this short break. Thanks.
Spanish. Tenemos unas preguntas en español. La mayoría de las
So we do
personas.
have a couple of questions in Spanish. I would say that many have mentioned and appreciated the fact that education is a tool, and this is for both sisters, a very relevant and important tool to empower those who are the outcasts in our societies. Two questions for Sister Alcelia. How can we educate to transcendence? Second question, what kind of changes do we have to adopt in order to overcome the fractures you mentioned?
Perfecto. Entonces, ¿cómo educar a la transciencia?
So I'll take this question, how to educate to transcendence. I would say the first practical piece of advice I could provide is to help in discovering that reality does not end here in this world. I'm thinking about, those who teach in schools. Maybe through the curricula, they could teach students that the material world is not the end of our lives. And a second advice could be to question ourselves
que tenemos hacia esa trascendencia.
about our love for transcendence. Because often what prevents us from transmitting and communicating transcendence is the fact that we have to be aware in the first place. And so we have to be able to live this love, hope for transcendence. Therefore, I believe that if we could actually become aware of this love, even through maybe creativity, this would turn into something concrete.
Hablo sobre todo para los que
Now, what kind of
tienen
change
escuelas
to adopt to overcome the fractures? I'm thinking about, in particular, I'm referring to those schools with, difficulties, the troublesome situations we are facing. As we all understand, we cannot work alone individually. We have to promote teamwork. We have to collaborate. Religious congregations are called to face the challenges and the current changes individually. They can certainly network together and jointly work and exchange views about maybe their own reality, their own difficulties, certainly would help to improve the concrete situations. And this is true not only for religious congregations, because they certainly can also count on bishops, priests, certainly, and in particular, with the dicastery, the Congregation for Catholic Education. So if we do not speak out, express these problems, it's going to be very difficult to solve them. How can we help those who do not express the difficulties they're facing? And this is why we need also to change our mindset. It's not going to be a radical change which is needed, because certainly in the Catholic world and in the Catholic education, we are all driven and motivated by the love of God and our love for God. What we have to probably change is our way of working. So in trying to heal the three fractures, this is also important, because if we achieve a vision of transcendence, that is, if we keep in mind and if we are aware that we're not only working to improve the situation now in where we are, but also thinking that we are improving the life of people, especially if we are driven by the love for others, and if we work together, these elements were going to certainly help us concretely to change our presence, our current reality. And we are accompanied in this mission, since fundamental and concrete decisions, that is, for example, opening a school, helping a child, helping a young person, is not only our own task, because we are also supported by our church. The church is not only an institution, it's certainly the prayer of the faith in a global dimension. So I believe already, if you use these very simple elements, we are able to shift a bit our prospects and vision, the situation will improve. Thank you. Excuse me, the microphone.
That better? Yeah. Thank you, Alcelia, for answering that question. And now we're just, we've got a couple more comments. Lots of comments thanking the two speakers for their presentations. We have one question regarding the Indigenous populations, Indigenous communities, which of course is a very important one, but will be discussed at an upcoming seminar on July 15. So we might hold off on that question. We've just got a couple of minutes left. One of the questions is regarding how the church can find more creative ways to engage with families today, with young people and with children, particularly in the context of the pandemic. Sister Miriam, should I throw that one to you?
I think the first is to getting closer to the youth. Surely the situation also of the church in many parts of the world is different. Very often the youth, they see the church as institution, and at least in the West, it is like that, as a rigid system, as a dogmatic system. So how do we get closer to the youth and understand their struggles, also their perspective of the world? So I think dogmatic does not help very much there, but it is more the relationship of persons who get in touch and who somehow try to build bridges, and who start also with the struggles of the youth, to take them where they are and help them maybe see also a broader picture. So I think indeed the church needs to find more creative ways to come closer to the youth, because the youth is our future, and therefore it is very important also to bring to them the treasures we have in our faith, because many, they don't care about it. At least in the West, we have that the church as institution is not reliable anymore, or is not trusted anymore, because also of the many scandals. So one thing is, how do we gain trust? How do we regain the trust also of the people in these situations? And that is not an easy task.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sister Miriam, for responding to that question. I think we've run out of time, unfortunately. So I'd like to just quickly thank both of our speakers for their quite diverse interventions, but both extremely interesting, both with some real practical tips in there for everyone who's joined us today, and I think some real points of reflection in terms also of the situation, the pandemic situation that we find ourselves in. So thanks again to our speakers, and I'll hand back to Sister Pat for the next session. Thanks to all.
Just to thank you, Ambassador, for your moderating this section of today's webinar. I'm very grateful for your presence, and I think it's particularly important during this significant year for Catholic education in Australia, and knowing the number of young people who actually are involved in Catholic schools in Australia. I'm grateful for your gentle and gracious facilitation, and your ability to sum up what we've heard and to point to some of the key areas that we need to pay attention to and to highlight in our conversations. You know, when we're dealing with our fractured world, we have to have these encounters and conversations about things that really matter today. And maybe it's as you said, it's finding the creativity to see how all can join in that. I was struck by Pope Francis's comment that the project needs to involve everybody. That's, I think, one of our biggest challenges today. Thank you for your comments, and thank you. I just want to thank you for your support of the UISG here as the international organization that supports the leaders of women's congregations. I think it's always been important for us to have the support of women ambassadors like yourselves. So we're like yourselves, so we're very grateful indeed. We're now going into the last section of today's session, and that's a meeting. We're going to meet 4 sisters who are members of the Joint Commission for Education. That's the Joint Commission of the 2 unions, the International Union of Superiors General, which are female congregations, and the Union of Superiors General, the male congregations. So we have 4 sisters that you see on your screen, and I'll introduce them briefly because I'm looking forward to hearing their reflection and their inspiration. First of all, we have Sister Leah Latella, who's an Italian member of the Claretian Missionary Sisters. She studied at the Salesian University here in Rome. She has a baccalaureate in science in the science of education and a master's in psychology of education. Secondly, we have Adelaida Morena Puente from Spain, who's a member of the congregation the Carmelita de la Carità Vedruna, the Vedruna Sisters. She has always worked in education at different levels within our congregation, has been involved in education in a public school and being part of civic platforms in Spain. And then we have Maria Teresa Pinto, who's a member of the congregation of the Hijas de Jesu. She's been a professor of education at secondary level in many different centers of her congregation in Spain. And she has also been a school principal. So she's involved in leadership within our congregation. So she brings that expertise to the reflection of the congregation. And finally, Sister Elena Rastello, who's an Italian, a Salesian sister. She has a doctorate in the sociology of education, and she has a lot of experience in working with youth for over 20 years, following very much the vision and the footsteps of Don Bosco. And she has been involved for many years in Eastern Africa. She's part of her congregational pastoral team, particularly looking at youth and the mission of education. So over to you. And I call on you to share your inspiration and your insights with us, particularly in relation to the Global Compact on Education. Thank you very much. So perhaps, thank you.
Gracias por darnos este espacio para poder dar a conocer.
So thank you so much for giving us this, let's say, this space for us in order to be able to present a bit the result, the outcome of the seminar, the webinar on 2020. I believe that the webinar on the Global Compact on Education has been almost like a little light, a small light through this Global Compact, which came within the webinar. I would like to start with quoting Coralina, quoting her. She's in her poetry and poem, which is, "I am made of scraps, colorful bits and pieces of each life that passes through mine and that I sew into my soul." And I think that this is how life is made, from pieces of other people that become part of the people too. So inspired by Cora Coralina's poem, this one is made. Dreams, joint aspirations, desires, encounters along the way, scraps of inspirations and aspirations that like those that emerged in the 2020 education webinar, because the webinar, this webinar on the Compact on Education really had a strong and meaningful impact. And we believe that this was also favored by this methodology, which was the appreciative inquiry methodology, which allowed the almost 700 people enrolled from more than 60 countries, from 5 continents, and 70 congregations with educational charisms, religious men and women, laymen and women, all together started to think and walk together, listening to all of the voices and involving all of the participants. These were like little pieces and snapshots of life of those people who are becoming part of the people too. As Coralina tells us, the webinar promoted an experience of shared wisdom. I'm very much aware in an atmosphere of joy and hope in the light of progress. We are learners of a collective wisdom. This experience really touched us. And this experience that walking together enriches us and makes us better people is something that was strongly highlighted. We know that positive experiences always leave life-generating traces. Working together, starting from the positive core of the person, which is characterized by this methodology, creates synergy, unites, opens up expectations, because it really brings out the best of people. And this is exactly what we felt in the webinar, this kind of dynamic, which allowed us to produce different and pluralistic declarations, which we had redefined as dreams. And these were elaborated in relation with the Global Compact on Education, and also with the idea of a radical change and transformation. Of course, all of this material is available on the USG website, and it is available in 4 languages. Now, of course, the activity did not stop at the webinar, but after that, all of these declarations, desires have been elaborated, sorted out, and reorganized, and they were grouped into 10 areas of opportunity, resulting in summary, the synthesis of a declaration of aspirations with each of them lines of action, very concrete lines of action, documentation which should be able to use in order to work on the compact. So this was just a part of the outcome of the seminar, of the webinar. So in addition to inviting you to learn and appreciate this material, which, as mentioned, is available on the website of the USG, we would like to briefly present you some of them today. Thank you. Thank you, first of all, for this opportunity. And now, following this reflection in Coralina's poem, reads, "May I too leave little pieces of me on the roads, and may they become part of history." Now, so with the words from Cora Coralinas, I would like to share one of the aspirations and that resonated among the participants of the webinar in this search for a global convergence, for an education that is the bearer of an alliance between all that favors the person and the various institutions involved in education. An educational mission that makes us responsible actors of change, capable of co-creating the education village by bringing to life and participating in networks of human and open relationships that have the courage to recognize that everything in the world is intimately connected. And this has been often repeated in this meeting. Educational responsibility places the value of each creature at the center in relation to people and to the reality that surrounds it, and proposes a lifestyle that favors a more welcoming society that is attentive to the care of others and of creation. We're speaking about education that invests the talents of all to build the future of our planet. And as Pope Francis tells us, our origin is a common one. And so, of course, we have a common origin, a mutual belonging, and a shared future. And it is equality that makes us sisters, connects us to God, and makes us discover that the whole universe grows and grows with humanity and engages us in its care. So looking a bit at the practical lines of action, which were underlined during the webinar, we also feel that we should provide equal educational opportunities based on the human dignity to actually sort of meet and close the gap between rich and poor, to eliminate poverty and generate socially responsible people and a peaceful world. We also unleash the potential in everyone, both rich or poor, and we enable the poor to make projects and carry them out by themselves. This certainly empowers them and breaks their dependency. And at the same time, we make the rich aware of their responsibility with an equitable distribution of goods, so that everyone enjoys the same opportunities. Also in practice, we create an inclusive, mutual, and collaborative educational environment, and committing to start by appreciating oneself and to be the change one wants to see in others. We educate with responsibility, peacefully, to form fully people, to become citizens who can respond to global needs. We promote teamwork, creative and transforming educational environments. We therefore affirm and state that we are the educators, men and women, who live the educational passion. So this love, this passion, which we have also listened this today. So we are the ones who generate spaces of encounter with themselves, with God, and with others, guaranteeing the possibility of transforming the world from within and with responsibility. they, men and women, favor reciprocity, between interiority and otherness, and how to discover mysticism that is in everything. They promote the care of a renewed and conscious lifestyle. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you very much.
Yo sigo con el poema de Cora Coralina.
I will continue always with the Cora Coralina's power. And so piece by piece, we can become one day an immense embroidery of ourselves. And when Pope Francis calls us to rebuild a global pact, he tells us we need to build a village of education where the commitment to generate a network of human and open relationships is shared in diversity. An African proverb says that to educate a child, it takes a whole village. Therefore, we must build this village as a precondition for educating. The ground must be clean and reclaimed of discrimination with the introduction of fraternity. The participants of the webinar highlighted some statements about in reference to the
creamos un espacio abierto a la diversidad,
open to diversity.
comparte
People
experiencia
share
y
experience and learn from each other to reflect on the problems of the people.
parte.
Everyone feels part of it.
Otro proverbio.
Expression of the proverb: alone we go faster,
Lejos.
together we go further.
Fraternas entre
So
personas,
fraternal
comunidades,
relationships between individuals, communities, and institutions are strengthened.
animan
Meaningful,
a otros
Christ-centered bonds that encourage others to join and form transforming villages. For global community, we foster a sustainable ecosystem in which we are all connected, enabling us to engage a wide range of stakeholders.
mueve este pacto
Space that promotes this covenant to rebuild the fabric of relationships, of consciousness, and to foster a culture of encounter. We seek a common good in our daily lives, and we are supported by our educational communities and our congregations. We build relationships with others. In summary, Christian educational communities have the potential, we are convinced and we believe, that they have the potential to generate the relationships in our global homes needs of fellowship, fraternity, compassion, and care for each one, for those who suffer, for nature, for the common destiny of all things, internal relationships. The climate that is lived in such a community
sobre todo si su actividad se
is a great strength, especially if its activities
allí
are
reflexión.
managed in contact with the
Entorno
environment.
sabe que allí se acoge la riqueza de la
And reflection is shared because all
diálogo
the
sobre los
environment
temas que
knows that the importance of interculturality is accepted, and dialogue
y verdaderamente
on the problems that affect the local
fue
and
una
global village are promoted. So the webinar actually has been a short experience of
In ogni pezzo una vita, una
in
lezione,
each piece a life,
nostalgia.
a lesson, a love, and a
Ci aprono
nostalgia.
dagli orizzonti
Nostalgia.
più ampi che
So these lines of Cora Coralina's poem opens us to another
nell'opera educativa.
perspective with broader
Chiamo la
horizons,
sfida urgente di
which
proteggere la casa comune.
made, educators
Di unire
enthusiasts. In the work of education, we feel the urgent challenge of
sostenibile
also understand the concern to unite the whole human family in the search for sustainable and integral development, because we know that things can change. The encyclical Laudato Si is helping teachers, professors, parents, together with children, teenagers, and young people to recognize the greatness, urgency, and beauty of the challenge before us. We can no longer steal the future for new generations. Between concreteness and responsibility, we are becoming a movement, an educational movement that from below involves and encourages, according to the vision of the Global Pact on Education. We are interconnected, interdependent, educating communities, signs of peace for humanity and in creation, according to the heart of God. This is one of the concrete guidelines, which is the outcome of the webinar. We build bridges together with younger generations, together with a global fraternity that implements social friendship and care for those who struggle most in classrooms, courtyards, reflecting and playing and wonder, contemplation, and social transformation. We educate ourselves and we educate the children, young people, teenagers to love the singing of birds, drink water from clean springs, marvel at the sounds of the forest, to pick a fruit from the tree, to listen to the peaks and the flowing of a stream. But we also educate, and we educate them and ourselves, to the beauty of a smile, of a gracious smile and a free smile, of alternative and new gestures, to the sacrifice of a deprivation and a more sober life in order to give a future to an abandoned, wounded, and lonely young person, maybe living at the other end of the world or on a periphery. We look at the world and perceive its unfathomable beauty. We are a global educating community, concretely and realistically on the road to conversion. And we also live with conviction to the transition towards integral ecology. So in order to be for a humanity which is proud of its dignity, for more beautiful cities, more livable territories, God's dream is possible. And through this webinar, we understood that a good ecological education in childhood, in adolescence, encourages behaviors that combat the culture of discarding, of indifference, and has a direct impact on the care for the environment, and also sows seeds, can have lifelong effects. And this is actually hope. Just before concluding this communication, we would like to ask a question. Let us dare to dream together the construction of the world to come, taking care of future generations, activating an educational challenge based on universal fraternity. We should dare to put this into practice. Let us dream because, as Helder Camera states, when you dream, it is only a dream. When you dream with others, it is the beginning of reality. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
And I thank you very much for your contribution, which was most inspiring. I am left with some lovely visual images. First the jigsaw pieces representing the scraps that we have to put together, the beautiful tapestry, the colors that show our diversity, the challenge to build a village and to dare to dream together, but also to be very practical in our living so that we really meet the needs through education of those who are on the margins of society, but where we unleash the potential of all, where everybody feels that they have a role to play, so that we build this universal community where as sisters and brothers, we all feel at home in this world. I think at an individual level, we're made up of scraps. At a human community level, we're made up of scraps, but it's those very scraps, even the very things that we discard sometimes, that are the most precious treasures we have in order to bring about the change that we see. So that the seminar really produced an enormous fruit, and I really invite people who are present today and who maybe did not attend the seminar to go and look at the resources on the UISG website, which are most helpful and which will help reflection within school communities, within parishes, within families too, in terms of what steps can we take. I love the fact that you use the poet from Coralina, and her lines reminded me of another poet, Mary Oliver, and she has some very lovely quotations. For example, one of the things she says is, "Tell me what it is you plan to do with your one wild and precious life." Another quote is, "When it's all over," she said, "I want to say, all my life I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms." And finally, a quote from her, "I don't want to end up simply having visited this world." I think your reflections today prodded us to say, how do we want to be in the world, and how do we want to educate our young people today, because they're the future, as you said. What dreams and desires and aspirations do we want to sow so that we can rebuild the fabric of social community at a global level, and at the same time build it village by village, by sharing experiences, by reflecting together, by creating a movement, particularly for those who suffer most, and by nurturing them a love of the other, a love of nature, a marvel at beauty, and a knowledge that it's the very simple things of life that often bring about change. A smile, a hand reaching out, a hand up. So as we end today, I'm sure those who have participated have many thoughts and reflections. I suggest that when we end this webinar, you take a moment or two to ask yourself, as a result of this particular event, what is it you want to remember? And what is it you would like to do? We have been inspired today by Sister Alcelia, by Sister Miriam, and by our panelists here at the end. So what do you want to take with you as you move through the world of education? What do you want to share with others? What are the questions that it poses for you? And so in ending, I just want to thank you for being here today. We have dates for our future meetings of this series, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Muchas gracias. Thank you. Travel well, and take with you something that you feel is precious from the encounter we had today. Thank you very much indeed.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias a todas.
A ustedes, los micrófonos están abiertos.
Muchas gracias, Pat. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Patricia, Pat.
Maravilloso encuentro.
Thank you very much, Pat.
Gracias, Patricia.